Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming to Haunted Aurora. I'm very excited to do a seasonal local history program of some type for you. Diane is here with us. Diane is a storyteller and a local historian. She's going to tell us all about some of our favorite places in Aurora. We do also have a couple of other seasonal programs coming up. Let me pull up my website real quick so I make sure I get the details correct. So on October 30th, the day before Halloween, over at the main library on River Street, we are going to be hosting a paranormal investigator named Carl Crooks. So if any of you are interested in that, that is happening 6 p.m. Wednesday, October 30th. We do also have a paranormal discussion group at the library that meets year-round. They also meet over at the main library on the second Wednesday of every month. And they have all sorts of fun things to talk about. So I'm not going to take up any more of your time. I'm going to let Diane go ahead and get started. And I will be running the Zoom chat in the meantime.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the Zoom. Again, my name is Diane Ladley, and I am the author of the book Haunted Aurora. I also wrote the book that is currently called Naperville's Haunted Memories. The publisher changed the name on it, originally Haunted Naperville, so they didn't even tell me they changed the title. This is lovely. But I also started up the ghost tours in this immediate area. I originally called them Haunted Hometowns. I started 20 years ago in my haunted hometown of Naperville, where I was actually born and raised. And I started it when this happened to me. I became permanently disabled and lost my job. And desperate for money, I turned my physical therapy walks into a money-making venture. And I used all the stories that I heard growing up in Naperville. One too many slumber parties with the flashlight tucked under the chin. And much to my shock, when I did research, I discovered that many of these old stories that I thought were just made up stories actually had basis in fact. These were events that happened in my hometown that I had never known had happened, because they were not for children's ears. They were dark, depressing stories. Well, that's exactly the kind of stories kids love. And so I felt almost cheated that I didn't know my own town's history. And so I'm so glad all of you are all here to hear more about your town's history, but told in a very unique and I find compelling way through the medium of ghost stories, its own urban legends or suburban legends, as the case may be. Okay, so I started in Naperville, as I said, and then that was 20 years ago. And then I branched out in 2007 to Aurora as well. And I currently also give the tours at the Two Brothers Roundhouse. That's indoors all year round at the Roundhouse, and you get to take your beers along with you. And I also do the Resurrection Mary Archer Avenue bus tours. I did sell my company to the American Ghost Walks the year before COVID. So I felt really bad for him. He spent all this money and then had no tours. But I still work as an independent contractor for them, and I'm loving every second. It's great. I have all the fun of telling my ghost stories without any of the customer service, ticketing, or insurance, nothing like that. So I get the best of both worlds. Okay, let me take you back to the year 1856. This is the year that Democrat James Buchanan defeated the Whig Party candidate Millard Fillmore to become the 15th president of the United States. This is the year that the Republican Party had its first ever convention on an anti-slavery platform. And among its many rising stars was this rather tall, homely looking lawyer from Illinois by the name of Lincoln. He had first cousins that lived here in Aurora. So he was a very frequent visitor to our town streets. This is also the year the first tintype camera was awarded a patent and the first kindergarten opened up in Wisconsin. And here in Aurora, Illinois, they began work on the largest stone roundhouse in the nation. No echo. Big deal, right? Oh, it was huge. Because just a few years before, gold had been discovered in California. Everybody and their brother was rushing off to California to try to strike it rich. And they needed more and more trains to bring not just the people down there, but all the equipment and supplies, everything else. So to do that, they needed locomotives. And a roundhouse is there where they used to build the steam locomotives. Now, why is a roundhouse round? It's simply to accommodate the fact that locomotives could not go in reverse. So rather than making one long line of service bays like today's do-it-yourself car washes with all that expensive railroad track going in and out of each one, instead they simply nested it into a giant ring. They would build one of the locomotives in one of the service bays, and when it was done, they would steam it out into the very center of that ring, where they had a turntable with a single set of rails. And using man, mule, and steam power, they would rotate that vast turntable until the train faced out the door, and then it would begin its journey. By the turn of the last century, the roundhouse was the economic king of 4 counties, employing as many as 2,400 men, and even more paid under the table. All the acres around there, 70 acres, was dedicated to outbuildings that were supporting the roundhouse, fire stations, coal stations, multiple workshops everywhere, even a second roundhouse where the Holiday Inn is right now, too. Make no mistake, men died in that building and in those surrounding acres. But back then, there's no OSHA, no safety features, safety is for wusses. The Spring Lake Cemetery has a list where they had buried all the severed arms and legs that had been cut off from roundhouse employees. So when that employee eventually died, they would know to go down that list and dig up that severed arm and put it in with the rest of the body. According to religious lore, Christian lore, that meant when Jesus would raise up the dead at the end of days, that guy would still have his arm. It was a general rule of thumb back then for any manufacturing industry that managers were told if you had to choose between saving the lives of 5 men or 1 mule, you save that mule. That mule cost $25, by God. Men, they were cheap. Back then they weren't. Because people were coming from all across the world to this brand new nation that was desperate for workers. And so for every one job, there'd be over 200 men applying for it. Yeah, they could pay them dirt cheap and work them horrific hours. The men at the roundhouse worked 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week. Remember that next time you're sitting at your office at the tail end of a Friday, just thinking, oh, I want this weekend to come. It really came for them. Even at the turn of the last century, the roundhouse was already considered haunted. The workers started reporting hearing disembodied voices calling their names from empty rooms. They would hear the sound of heavy boots following after them or walking next to them down the corridors where no one was there. But most often they talked about the shadow men. Strange, human-shaped figures of nothing but the darkest shadow that would watch them from corners, that would ooze out from the darkness and stand there watching them, doing nothing else, just watching, causing that tiny hairs on the back of your neck to rise up and prickle and make you turn over your shoulder to gasp to see this human-shaped shadow darting away with uncanny speed. Then came the age of the automobile, and highways stretched across the nation and cheap automobiles came around. And then the age of the airplane and the once almighty, all-powerful railroad industry went into its decline. It's been steady ever since. but nowhere did it have this amount of influence and power it had before. They started laying workers off by the hundreds at a time at the roundhouse, started tearing down all the extra outbuildings they didn't need, until by the 1970s, there's just a handful of men left over working maintenance on the commuter trains at night. The wrecking ball came, started tearing all the extra outbuildings, tore down that second roundhouse, and the wrecking ball was swinging at the roundhouse when the people of Aurora stood up and said no. It was the year 1976, America's bicentennial. And you can't tear down an iconic piece of American history like the roundhouse, the world's largest stone roundhouse in the nation, like the roundhouse on America's birthday. So the people of Aurora, they gathered up their money and they bought the roundhouse from the railroad, saving the day. But like any morning after any wild party, the people looked up after the bicentennial and thought, oh my God, what have we done? What are they do with this now? Every developer that showed interest, they just want to tear it down, and that was kind of defeating the whole purpose of saving it in the first place. So it stood empty for 20 long years. Empty, of course, except, the rats and the bats and the drug addicts and their dealers and the pimps and the prostitutes and a bunch of neighborhood kids who thought it was the best playground ever. And of course, the countless ghosts still working long hours to keep the vanished iron horses running strong. It was during that time that the ghost stories flourished, because now it really looked haunted. I had the great good fortune to have met some of those former kids, now grown-up adults. And they took me over to the roundhouse and they started pointing out, oh, remember this happened here, remember this happened there. It was a memory lane for them, but it was a chilling experience for me, hearing everything that had happened to them when they were kids. They too talked about hearing disembodied voices, hearing footsteps passing right by them in the night with nothing there. They reported hearing the sound of steam locomotives suddenly rumble into life in the center of the building, but nothing was there, and no trains were out on the train tracks outside. Most often they talked about the shadow men. They saw the same things as those men did 100 years before. Still doing nothing. Nothing to harm people. Except for the occasional get out. And they would get out. It was in the 1980s. A young man who did not want his name ever to be told, so I call him Gary. He was going to take his girlfriend out for a special night of romance. So he took her to the roundhouse. Nowadays, that'd be a great date. Back then, what were you thinking? Well, I'll confess, it was not romance he had in mind. It was more boom chicka wow wow. So he took her there, and he knew the exact spot he wanted to snozzle. It was the spot where the wrecking ball had swung. And the roof had caved down inward toward the center ring. Kind of looked like a giant had stepped inside the ring of the roundhouse and then sat down and leaned back on his own personal lazy boy. So the roof was caved in, and it made this little triangle that was the perfect spot that he had in mind. Right here, in the very tiniest angle of that triangle. It was dark, it was quiet, it was secluded. It was considered to be extremely haunted because for some reason, that spot was always colder than any place else. Even on the hottest July night, that spot was always cold, but it wasn't a cold of the skin. It was as if all the positive ions in the atmosphere were negative at that spot. But for his purposes, it was nice and quiet and private. So he took his girlfriend Liz there, and he laid out his blanket, and he lit his kerosene lantern. They sat down together chatting and they split a beer and a funny cigarette. And then they got down to making out. Yeah. And Gary was in heaven. Because Liz was letting him go farther than she ever had before. He decided he was going to try to go to the next base. So he laid Liz down fully on her back and he's looking down at her, looking for the acceptance and the trust. And she was looking up at him, her eyes, oh, Gary, her hands buried in his hair. Yes, Gary. And suddenly he said her eyes opened up to look at his face and then suddenly darted over to his side as if something had distracted her over his shoulder. And he told me that in that moment, he would never forget the sight of her face if he lived to be 100 years old. He watched as her eyes suddenly grew huge and fixated on that sight. He watched the blood drain from her face in the light of the lantern. Her mouth dropped open, her hands buried lovingly in his hair suddenly turned into icy claws that clamped down on his scalp, and she screamed in his face, ripped him off her body, got up and ran screaming out of the roundhouse. Gary sat there on his butt and said, "What just happened?" And he saw his breath in the night air. Now, it had been a relatively warm night, but he realized around him suddenly the temperature had plummeted 20, 30 degrees. It was freezing cold. He made a special point of talking about the flame in his oil lantern. He said the flame suddenly scrunched in on itself, as if the air around him, the darkness had suddenly gained a density, a heaviness that was smothering that flame. He felt it pressing against his body, his skin. And in almost poetic terms, he described a little feeling that started in his belly, deep in his gut. Dread. And it started scritching across his torso. He felt it crawling down his arms. He watched the hair and the goosebumps rising up on his arms. He felt it oozing up his spine, up his neck, to the top of his head. His hair stood on end because he knew that there was someone or something standing right behind him. But it made no sound, no breath, no rustling of clothes, no shuffling of feet, nothing at all. But that presence was so palpable, roiling off from it these waves of icy cold dread. He didn't remember the next minute or two. The next thing he remembers is running down the street outside the roundhouse, screaming even louder than Liz did. Now, the next morning, he felt like an idiot. He thought, just must have been some homeless guy. They're in the roundhouse all the time. He saw our lantern, maybe wanted to bum a cigarette or a light. Oh, man, all my stuff is going to be gone because that's gold to a homeless person, my beer, my cigarettes. So he thought he's going to go back to the roundhouse and see if there's anything he can salvage. But he took his two biggest buddies along with him. His stuff was untouched. Even the funny cigarettes, still there. They gathered everything up and they went to Liz's house and they asked her, "What did you see over my shoulder?" And to their surprise, she refused to answer. The only thing she would say is, "Gary, if you love me, you will never go back there again." I said, "Come on, Liz, are you kidding me? We've been hanging out there since we were kids. That's our hangout spot. So, Gary, if you love me, you will never go back again. If you love me." And tears are rolling down her cheeks. She is openly sobbing in fear. I mean, what can he do, you know? He didn't love her that much. So they broke up. To the best of his knowledge, she never did go back to the roundhouse. But he did, that's where they hung out all the time. He admitted that he never again stayed past twilight. And he never went into that tiny little space under the broken roof where he had had the fight of his life. That's just one of the many stories I tell about the Roundhouse. It is extremely haunted. And on my tours, we do little paranormal investigations. My guests get to use toys. This is an electrical magnetic field sensor. If you go to the paranormal meeting, I'm sure you're going to hear all about it. But typical piece of equipment in every electrician's toolbox. There's nothing woo about it. All it does is detect and measure electrical fields. That's it. But we believe that ghosts are the electrical energy that runs through our entire central nervous system. Enough electrical energy, we could light a 100-watt light bulb, and it goes through every square inch of us in millions of little areas. It burrows through the center of our brain, through the jelly of our brain. It creates our thoughts, our ideas, our memories. So what happens to all that electrical energy when we die? Does it just wink out like a light switch? We know it's not destroyed. Nothing in nature is ever destroyed. Thank you, Albert Einstein. It really transforms into some new kind of action. And maybe if your final moments of life are surrounded by your loved ones and you're in your hospital bed or hospice bed and you're in that final stage of death, ready to take that final journey into the unknown, your energy is going to be low, not much to decay or hang around anywhere. But if your final moments of life are a knife headed toward your face, energy will surge up high, and where does it go? Does it just hang there, recreating the final moments of your life? Because that's what it remembers most powerfully. Is that a ghost? And maybe there are some of these ghosts who remember and are still able to think, and they remember that if I can feed some electrical energy into my body, I could survive. They're still able to access those memory channels, kind of like how an amputee can still feel their hand, even though it's long gone. And that way they're able to still have some intelligence, but can't communicate very well. Maybe they could move things off a table. Maybe they could turn themselves into dark shadows of negative electrical energy. All the things that we associate with the principles of ghosts can be explained by the principles of electricity. So that's why on my tours, all those who wish get to carry a completely cleaned EMF ghost meter. Maybe at the end, we'll be able to include a few question and answer sessions. And I have about 8 of these that I brought along. If you want to take them around the room and test your loved ones to see if they're ghosts or not, you're more than welcome to do so. So yes, we carry that around, and at the Two Brothers, it's pretty common that something happens. Nothing on my tours are rigged or staged in any way, shape, or form. I do not believe in doing that. I despise tour operators that do that. And I don't know how to do that. So that kind of puts the cork into that whole thought as well. So yeah, at the Roundhouse, at the Historic District of Naperville, and the Resurrection Mary tour, and the Downtown Aurora tour. Speaking of Downtown Aurora, let's go back to the year 1931. This is the year the world's tallest building, the Empire State Building, was erected in New York City. This is the year that Donald Duck, Dick Tracy, and Alka-Seltzer were introduced to grateful American audiences. This is the year unemployment with 16.3% as the results of the great stock market crash was just getting underway. to devastate America for the next decade. And in Aurora, well, Aurora, we were the entertainment capital of the Midwest. You see, nowadays, we'll go into Chicago if we want to have a fun, wild weekend. But back then, people in Chicago came out here to the western burbs, to Aurora, because Chicago was a hellhole. It stank. The coal stench was awful, getting in the throat. There were the slaughterhouses, all of that horrific smells. The steel mills, sometimes the smoke from that would come out over to the city. They wanted to get out. So they would come out to the western burbs. And Aurora was the place. We had the most happening, hottest nightclubs, jazz and blues everywhere. We had something for every age of the family, petting zoos, everything. But the jewel in the entertainment crown opened up in 1931, and that was the Paramount Movie Palace. Built at the cost of $1 million, and that's Depression era dollars, mind you. It opened to this magnificent opulence beyond the dreams of the Depression era masses. Just the gorgeous Art Deco-ness of it, the golden paneling, the velvet everywhere. Oh, it was amazing. But what really drew audiences from all around the Midwest to the Paramount Movie Palace was the air conditioning. It was the first place outside of the city of Chicago in the entire state of Illinois to actually give you the experience of being freezing cold in the heart of July. First movie to be performed there, or to play there, Secrets of a Secretary, starring Claudette Colbert, one of the talkies, because yes, they invested in the talkie equipment that was necessary. First live act, Groucho Marx. And since then, the Paramount Movie Palace has played host to any number of stars of the stage and screen. There is a paranormal principle that states every theater must be haunted. I don't care where that theater is. Antarctica, it must be haunted. It's a law, like gravity. And so the Paramount Movie Palace is certainly no exception. People have reported seeing hazy-looking figures seated in the audience, wearing clothes from the 1930s and 40s that quickly vanish. There's a vaudeville performer down in the green rooms underneath the stage. They can hear him tap dancing every now and then, or playing the piano. They go down under there and they open up that door, and the room is dark. No one is there. But there are two ghosts in particular that are a very special part of the Paramount family, because they used to work there for almost their entire lives. Names were Mickey Foster and Jerry Close. Mickey and Jerry, they're best of friends in life and in afterlife, because they still hang out at the Paramount Palace. Jerry was in charge of the spotlight and the sound equipment way in the back of the auditorium. And Mickey, he was the technical director and manager, so he spent most of his time backstage. And those are the two most haunted spots in the entire building. I had the great good fortune and pleasure to one time I set up an interview. I was thinking I'd only be maybe a half hour to an hour to talk to them. Oh no. They passed me around from person to person and telling me all of their stories. I got a huge tour of the entire place. It's a rabbit warren in there. Mm-hmm. Do you know that there is a hidden bar down there at river level? That's where usually like Frank Sinatra liked to hang out to party with the cat or the technical people. But so Jerry, I heard from the sound person that every now and then he'd be getting ready, you know, there's a performance going on, he'd be getting ready to do a sound cue, and suddenly he will feel what he described as a meat locker opening up at his back, freezing cold. Now that room itself, it's a sauna, because you have all these huge hot lights and spotlights, and all this hot air is boiling from there. It is incredibly cold. But there's this icy cold meat locker opening up behind him, and he'll suddenly smell cigarettes. Jerry was a 5-pack-a-day smoker. And he gets the presence, feels that presence of Jerry himself, standing over his shoulder, making sure he gets that sound cue just right. Now, he's so far never messed up a sound cue while Jerry is watching, and he doesn't want to know what Jerry will do if he does mess up that cue. Backstage, though, well, that's a little different story. They have trouble sometimes keeping cleaning staff working late at night because people will quit in the middle of the night to hear footsteps pacing back and forth across the entire stage. But nothing shows up in that ghost light, that light that shines all night long on the stage. It's actually a safety feature, but everybody knows it's really for the ghosts to take their bows in the middle of the night. They'll hear these footsteps, but no one shows up in the light. Or sometimes they'll just see a shadowy figure moving back and forth across the stage, pacing back and forth. Mickey was a habitual pacer, so it's not at all surprising that he still paces back and forth. Sometimes you'll see the curtain move by itself. Props will disappear and reappear on the prop table every now and then. He has sometimes even shown up to some of his old employees. One employee was working way too late trying to get up the Christmas decorations in time for the Kenny Rogers Christmas show. He was up on a ladder and suddenly he hears a very well-remembered voice saying, "All right, son, time to go home." And he turned and he saw his old boss, Mickey, standing at the railing, looking down at him, holding onto the railing with this warm, fond smile, and then he was gone. There are all kinds of stories. Some that aren't even in my book because they're things that I've heard of after it was published. I had a guy on my tour. He used to work at the Paramount for about a year. He used to work as one of the guys at the end of the night that would have to close the whole building down. And he said there were multiple times that he would be, turn off the lights in one part of the building, and then he would come in to the near the front of the building where they have the big light box, that the master key of the box. And he'd go down, okay, all those lights are off. All right. Then he goes to another part of the building, shuts them off, double checks, and then he'll go back, okay, here's all the basement ones, and then he'll come back and a light had gone on in the basement. A light that had been turned off. He does not go back down into the basement. He lets it keep going on. He figured they're doing something important. He just gets out. And he said it happened multiple times. But there's some stories that the employees don't know about. Stories, experiences that my guests have had on our tours. I once had a tour. Big crowd, and there was a woman and a man standing right by the wall. And we're standing on the river walk, right outside what used to be the old entrance, the former entrance. The entrance that, Dillinger used to go into all the time when he came to check out what was going on at the Paramount. And so she's standing by the wall, I'm standing by the front entrance, and I'm telling the stories. And all of a sudden she turns to her husband, who's on her right. She gives him the glare of death. Man, you know what I'm talking about. And she said, "Stop that." He said, "Yes, dear, what did I do?" "You know what you did, stop it." "Okay." And I'm continuing on my story, trying to avoid this, even though it's almost right in my ear here. And she turns around, "But that one hurt." That, she did this end, that. He said, "What are you doing about it? You know what you're doing. I told you to stop it. Don't know what you're doing." And finally, it distracted me enough that my train of thought became empty boxcars. I said, "Excuse me, is there anything okay here?" She said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, but this jerk keeps reaching around behind me and tapping me on the shoulder like it's a ghost or something. And the last one, it really hurt. He tapped hard." And her husband said, "Honey, my hands have been in my pockets this whole time because I'm cold." I said, "Ma'am, I can attest, he's not been doing anything." So she slowly turned all the way around, saw that no one was behind her, no one was anywhere near her, and when she turned back, she had a strange expression on her face. And then she burst out, "I got my money's worth." And every now and then I'll be giving the tour and all of a sudden I'll see somebody go, or like, because they sometimes hear a voice. And I tell them, "Oh, that's Mickey and Jerry telling you to please make way because Frank Sinatra is wanting to get through the stage door." Check out the Paramount. If you never have, please do. You'll thank me for it because it is magnificently restored. So beautiful and top-notch plates. And this last story, I'm kind of cheating because it's not technically an Aurora story, but it's so deeply associated with Aurora. We could call it far southern Aurora. So south, it's Oswego, but we'll call it Aurora. And it's the story of the ghost of Cherry Road. Anybody live near Cherry Road on? No? Okay. Well, for the longest time, Cherry Road was just a tiny little, like a paved over farmer's track. Barely wide enough for two cars to pass through, not even a central painted line down there. And it cut through cornfield after cornfield after cornfield, going all the way south. It's a dark, dark road at night. Especially in October when the fog would rise up from the cornfields and cover up that road. There are no lights down Cherry Road. Maybe a farmer's porch light set from way off there. The legend goes that a woman got into an argument with her boyfriend. She hopped in her car and she took off driving. She didn't care where she was going. She just wanted to get away from that idiot. She found herself driving way too fast down that dark Cherry Road. She had no idea where she was. She didn't care. All she cared about was the anger inside her. She's driving along way too fast and she flashed by a sign warning her that Cherry Road comes to an abrupt T intersection just ahead. And by the time she saw that guardrail in front of her and the road ending, it was too late, but she slammed on the brakes anyway. She slid down and she burst through that guardrail like there was tissue paper, went down a little hill, hit a tree head on. She went flying through the windshield, was sliced to ribbons through the glass. She landed on the hood of the car, but she was not dead. Knowing that her only hope of anybody seeing her would be if she could get up back to Cherry Road, she clambered off, fell off the hood of the car, and she crawled her way up that tiny little hill through the grass until she got to that intersection. And dipping her fingers in her own blood, she wrote out the word help in red, wet letters. And just as she finished the final stroke, she died. But they say that to this day, if you travel down Cherry Road, and maybe you're just going a little touch too fast, and you come near that sign warning you that Cherry Road ends in a T intersection, you just might see a woman reflected in your car's headlights. And at first you think she's wearing a striped gown, but you realize suddenly as you get closer, it's a gown that is sliced into ribbons with heart's blood coming down the dress. And you see the word help appearing before you on the blacktop in red, wet letters. Urban legend. Just an ordinary urban legend, unique to Aurora. It has a nice little spin on the vanishing hitchhiker tale. So very nice. So, but I actually did my research. Part of what I had my script and my book reviewed for historical accuracy by the Aurora Historical Society. So that's good. And they went a step further and they did research for me to see if there had ever been any car-related deaths on Cherry Road. And no, I'm happy to report no car-related deaths. So just an urban legend. Keywords there being car related. It was in 1994. No, before that, sorry. I don't usually tell this story anymore since my friend Rebecca took over the downtown Aurora tours, but. Yeah, 1994. They were blacktopping and fixing up Cherry Road for a subdivision that was going to be building up there. And those workers made a horrifying discovery. In a manhole that they pulled the cover off, there they found the body of a woman. Bricks had been tied to her feet by wire. More wire wrapped around her bound wrists, and even more wire dug into her throat. With the autopsy, at least they found out that she had died of poisoning, so that's one small mercy before her killers so cold-bloodedly stuffed her down that storm drain. And they found out eventually that she had been a woman missing from Chicago for 2 weeks. Chicago! How did she get all the way to the far south farm fields of Aurora from Chicago? We will never know. But it makes you think, doesn't it? Maybe it's her ghost who's standing by that sign, because that manhole cover was actually quite close to that sign, warning about the T intersection. Maybe it's her ghost that we see, warning us that her killer's never been found, and he walks among us to this day. And that is not an urban legend. I want to thank you all. Let's do the question and answer period of us. And who would like to try out an EMF ghost meter? I cleaned them all before. I have a few. Raise your hand. Chickens. Don't you want to know if the library's haunted? I don't know. Never been. For all we know, it's a Native American burial ground here.
I was gonna ask, have you ever heard anything about the original library building, the one that's on Benton Street?
Funny thing, I did just hear about that. What was it that they told me? And I wrote it down too. But if ever I get an update on my Haunted Aurora book, that's definitely going in there. That there does seem to be some sort of paranormal activity. Was it with the elevators? Was that it?
I don't know. I actually have never worked in that building. I
Okay.
started working here
Okay.
before, after the main library on River Street.
Okay, okay. Yeah, they say that some sort of paranormal activity has been reported at the old library,
Yeah,
the one that's been,
it's not a
It's-
library anymore.
okay, but it's, the building is still there.
The building
Yeah.
is still there.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a creepy building.
It was a Carnegie library originally.
Okay.
And then at one point they redid parts of it, including the facade, so now it has that weird, like pointy,
Yeah, yeah,
like glass facade.
yeah. Interesting.
It's a Carnegie building, it's an old building. so
Yeah,
it's
oh, for
curious.
sure, for sure. Interesting, yeah.
Mhm.
But I have heard about people having some experiences there, library employees who closing up at night, they just get the willies and start looking over their shoulder, get the creepy crawlies, that sort of thing. So, yeah, yeah. Who here believes in ghosts or believes in the possibility that there is?
Definitely.
Yeah, okay, okay. Who here has had some kind of paranormal experience they can't explain? Okay, okay. Have any of you experienced anything here in Aurora or Naperville? No, okay, okay. I'm always trying to learn more stories of this area. My roundhouse tour, it used to be 60 minutes and then it became 90 minutes. And now it's 2 hours and I still don't have enough time to tell about all the experiences that we have there. Oh, it's bizarre. It's so much fun. One night I had a family, mother, father, and their younger son. We don't usually say that kids should go on the tours Because some of them, they're mature subjects like suicide and murder and death, but there are some kids that are like, yeah, suicide. And especially you get one of these in their hands and they're just racing all over the place. They don't care about the stories. They want to see a ghost. And that night at the Roundhouse, it was pretty much the father and the son, they were like taking pictures everywhere. And so we were up on the second floor of the where they have the meeting rooms, the lager and the stout rooms. And surprisingly, that's the haunted heart of the very haunted building. And that's where the weirdest things happen. That's where we believe the entity I call the Dreadful Man moved up from the original, what is now the ballroom. We believe he left the ballroom because he's such a crotchety, miserable, unhappy troll of an entity. He doesn't want to be around people who are having fun, anniversaries, birthdays, weddings, celebrating. No. So we believe he went upstairs, and indeed, we have seen people on our tours have seen the same full-bodied apparition of a man wearing a blue work shirt and dark blue slacks. Several times they've seen them up there, and they could feel them up there too. Paranormal investigations have chatted with him. He has quite a potty mouth. But so there I was with the family, and so we continued on. We left the meeting rooms and we continued on up through like right above the on the second floor above the kitchens. And suddenly we hear a door slam coming from the meeting room area. Now we knew nobody had come in through the opposite end of the hallway because all the lights there, they activate, they're motion activated. They did not go on. But we did hear a door slam. So we went back there, finding, where was that door? And we knew it was one of the glass pane doors because you could hear that distinctive rattle of the glass. No, they were all open. Now that's weird. So we went back to where we were and we hear it again. And we go back again, and then we heard it a third time. It's like, what's going on? Well, finally, we ended up back in the stout room. The tour was over, and I'm thanking them, they're thanking me, yada. And I had to go back in the stout room to pick up my my bag over there. And suddenly the son said, "Dad, that door over there, the closet door, wasn't that open when we came in?" Sure enough, it was closed, and it was a glass pane door. And so we looked through the photos that he had taken, and sure enough, that door had been slightly open. We heard that door close, open, close, open, close 3 times without any hand, living hand, to touch it. It's so much fun. We have about 5 minutes left.
Did anything ever happen at Leland Towers?
Oh, you mean the suicide skyscraper? Yes. It is extremely haunted. Back when it opened in 1928. That was right before the stock market crashed, and it was the tallest building outside of Chicago. And maybe combined with the extraordinary height with the river below, it became a magnet for every suicidally inclined person in 4 counties. And the 21st floor was the popular jumping off spot. So popular that it said that the ghosts have to line up and wait their turn to reenact their final moments, whether they had jumped or had been pushed. Remember, this area was a gangster area, very rough place. Yeah, supposedly one of the elevators is haunted by a worker who had fallen down the elevator shaft. They say the elevator is very cranky, has a mind of its own, and sometimes a stench will rise up from it. Not the river stench that you might, but more like a rotten flesh stench rises up from it. Yes.
Where's that at?
Leland Tower, it is on, it's now called the Fox Island Apartments.
Sounds stolen.
Sounds Stoke, correct. Yeah, yeah, the big tall tower in the dead center of the island.
Right next.
Yes, it's
Paramount.
right.
Right next, kind of close to
Kind of
Paramount. Yeah, in that area. Yeah, yeah. So, but, on the tour, if you take it, you'll hear about the Warren Lincoln murders. Warren Lincoln, who was a descendant of Abraham Lincoln and looked just as handsome. And about the bizarre murders, when those came out and the truth was revealed, it went into newspapers across the nation. It was that bizarre. You'll hear about the resurrectionist industry in Aurora. I don't know if you're aware, Aurora is called the City of Lights. It's also called the City of Cemeteries. The unusually large cemeteries that we have here in town, 12 of them. Naperville, which is also a big, huge city, has 2. So, yeah, resurrectionist industry, when enterprising young men back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they would look through the newspapers and the obituaries, find out who had just died. And at night, they would go to the cemeteries, dig that person up and put that person in their wheelbarrow and fill the grave back in. And then take that body to, a medical doctor, or somebody who was teaching anatomy, and they desperately needed corpses. So, yeah, Root Street Cemetery. There used to be the Aurora Medical and Surgical Institute right next to it, headed by Dr. Frederick Pons. And he was suspected to be quite the resurrectionist, or at least the client. And his 300-bed facility, he had solved the mystery of cancer. He put out the shingle, said he could cure cancer even at the 4th stage of the disease, if only you'll come follow my diet regimen to the letter. Nobody did it to the letter. Some people might have gone into regression, but he chalked that up. That's me, I won. But he was also known for taking in orphans and widows who had this disease, that he could tend to them as well. But the neighbors around Root Street Cemetery would look out at night and see an oil lantern burning deep in the cemetery, and they go, oh, there's Dr. Pons burying another one of his charity cases after he's dissected it. Yeah, and how that finally was blown up in his face by Eliza Ann Bates. You have to take my tour. We have come to the end, and if anybody has any last second questions, I can answer.
Where was this hospital? Was it
It was just a block. Wait a minute, think. A block east of the roundhouse, a couple blocks east of the roundhouse. It's where the what's it called right now? It's the Veterans Memorial Yard right now. Yeah, it's on Root Street, at the very end of Root Street. So there used to be a big old cemetery there. Yeah.
Anything on the Tanner House?
Yes, as a matter of fact, they do believe that it's haunted. They can smell the scent of roses. There's a room off the kitchen that used to be the sick room, where if you were sick, that was where they would put you. And they say that every now and then they could smell the heavy scent of roses, though there's no roses in the entire house. So I had the great pleasure of going there one time, and we were the only ones in the house at the time. So we were getting all this attention and questions and answers. The place is spectacular. Highly recommend it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, you were just a half second fast.
Have you ever done a seance at the Roundhouse?
Not a seance, no. But I have been part of a paranormal investigation with Dale Kazmarek. He's kind of he's probably the biggest well-known paranormal investigator in this area, and he specializes in photography, which as a matter of fact, come to think of it, I could show you a picture at the Roundhouse. When we come up later, after we leave, I'll make sure to show you a couple pictures from the Roundhouse. Oh, I turned off the phone, that's why. They were very strange. Some of the employees, they were at a Christmas party. And, there's just a handful of them there, they're out in, what used to be the old comedy club, they now call it, I think, the tavern or something. And, they were the only ones in the entire building, they're playing Cards Against Humanity. And they'd get up now and then, and just, grab a drink from the bar and everything, and somebody took a photograph. And they're looking at the photo, oh, look at that, wait. Who's that guy in the back? There's a blurry image of a guy, it looks like he's wearing a white short sleeve shirt and a heavy brown leather apron. Funny thing, on some of the old photographs that the general manager has now, he's put up a history wall of all these old photographs and awards and everything, safety awards that they won back in the 50s. There is one picture of a number of employees and back from the roundhouse, back around the turn of the century. And one of them is wearing a brown leather apron, exactly like the one that was in the picture. That was weird. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, I think that wraps it. Oh, one more question, I beg your pardon.
This is actually a promotion for you,
Oh.
but where can we find out more about your tours?
Postcards. I'll put them up here. It's primarily promotes the Two Brothers Roundhouse up the front, but on the back, it does list all of our other tours. You can scan that code to go directly to the website, or you can just punch in the website. American Ghost Walks actually run the tours, and great guy, really nice company. But he runs tours all across the nation and Puerto Rico as well. So, yeah, but I brought plenty, feel free to take as many as you want. And thank you all so much.
Thank you.